Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to this special edition of the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us today, we welcome you in. This is a bit of an experimental episode, going back to a little bit more long-form subjects like I used to do, but let's see how it goes. Going to dive in and analyze some headlines. So let's get started. China is stepping up its place in the peacekeeping efforts. The United Nations has maintained peacekeeping troops almost since its beginning. Places like Cyprus in the Mediterranean Ocean or Mediterranean Sea, they've constantly had problems because there's three different factions on there: the Christians, the Islamic people, and the the secular people, who all want different visions for that one little stretch of land. The UN has provided peacekeeping forces there forever, who are basically there to sit there and make sure that they don't start shooting at each other. It's the very definition of a peacekeeping force. Sometimes they will have to get involved and things get messy. But China has been really stepping up their efforts in peacekeeping. They have over 2,000 troops dedicated to peacekeeping, which is phenomenal considering Canada used to have 2,000 troops dedicated to peacekeeping. And we've cut that back, mostly due to budgetary concerns. And Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has a legitimate fear, and that is that nations are not stepping up. So, what happens when nations don't step up? A company like China can come in and get free PR, public relations, because they can show their troops in frontline situations. There's another serious problem. China being involved with peacekeeping also means that they get to have some good frontline exposure with the troops they might be going up against. And there's always the opportunity for espionage. So, Joe Biden is legitimately worried that some of his troops loose lip sink ships, and Chinese are pretty good at human intelligence. Not quite as good as the Russians, but I don't think anybody really beats the Russians. So it takes the offer of a couple pretty people of whatever sex you prefer, a couple dollars in your pocket, maybe a couple drinks over a long deployment. They can get pretty friendly with you. It's a tale as old as time, and unfortunately it's not going away. But peacekeeping, it is a shame that the world is not picking that up. I mean, it's a good way to deploy your troops, get them experience, and not to be dumping them in a meat grinder like Afghanistan or Iraq. So something for the whole world to think about. Get involved with peacekeeping, and if they have too many peacekeeping troops, I'm sure there's other roles for them. They don't just sit there and wait to get shot at. They also help the locals. They set up schools. There's all sorts of funding that goes along with peacekeeping. China's getting a free PR win. And as we'll see later, China is really looking for that PR at the moment. They want to be perceived as a lot nicer than they are. But we'll get back to that. The CRTC, which is a Canadian Radio Telecommunications Corporation, has admitted that 25% of phone calls are spam. That's right. That's telemarketers or people outright trying to scam your stuff. They're going to be forcing new regulations to put new technology in to, quote, reduce, end quote, spoof phone calls. Now, what spoof phone calls are, I'm sure it's happened to you. Pretty much everybody with a cell phone has gone through on one of these. Somebody calls you up and it looks like a legitimate number. It's not one of those weird numbers like somebody calling you from Alberta or Omaha or an area code you just simply don't know. It looks like it's local. Sometimes they'll even put up a name. Like, for example, yesterday I received one from Steve Smith. Well, a lot of people know somebody named Steve, so you might look at it and answer it quickly. And then that's where the scam begins. mostly this targets mobile phones. Now, telemarketers and spammers are currently using this to get a far wider outreach than they are presently. And once they get you on the phone, a really good one can keep you on the phone. So my question is, we're never going to stop the spammers. I understand that's a civil criminal situation. But what we can stop are the telemarketers. We can go after the telemarketers and say, if you're doing business in this country, then you are required to have these checks in places, and we're going to come in and we're going to audit you and make sure you're not using spoofing software. Why is this not already in place? And why the telephone companies, yes, they are allowing it to happen, but realistically, they don't have much of a choice in the matter. I mean, if I get on the phone and I call the Prime Minister or the President, even though I have no reason to do, is that really the telephone company's problem? Or is that my problem as a guilty party? I think me being the one with intent would be the one who should be responsible. Going after the telecommunications company, it's good that we have a technical solution with it, but it's blaming the intermediary for the problem. Crack down on the telemarketing companies, crack down on spammers, and you solve the problem. And it's probably a lot cheaper to use law enforcement than it is to go through all this legislative and hardware, software, technology boom that we're going to be going through. Although I'm sure people like Apple and Google are going to love it because they're probably supplying the technology. Anyways, it's a big business expense coming out, and we're going to see how that works out in the next couple months. Needless to say, you go back to not answering your phone because nothing's changing anytime soon. Krista Haynes, or as you might know her, Krista Ford Haynes. Well, that's Doug Ford's daughter. She is what you call Instagram famous. Her life's accomplishments are playing for the Toronto team of the lingerie football team and going on sweaty-filled rants on Instagram while she's working out. Now, the interesting thing about her is she's caused a lot of controversy lately because she's gone on this big anti-vaccine tirade. While normally I would say with somebody like this, it is her right to say whatever she likes because we're all entitled to our opinions, the question has arisen because she is Doug Ford's eldest daughter, the premier of the province. How close is she to his actual views? Now, children do rebel. They decide to go a different way than their parents. But the question is, with all the lockdowns and everything that have happened, and Doug Ford going to his "I'm not shutting down with less than 1,000 people infected" diatribe, you really have to wonder what the thought process is in that family. Now, Ontario did get hit pretty hard with COVID, and I might get suspended on the channel just for saying its name because YouTube is cracking down on that. But the fact is, if Premier Ford is not president yet, and hopefully never will be, but if his own family feels that way, you have to question what his actual ethics are and what he says behind closed doors. The Ford family has always been good at leading a double life. They say one thing and they do another. His brother, for example, being the law and order and we're going to have everything fixed mayor, meanwhile having crack cocaine-fueled parties doing all sorts of crazy stuff. The Ford family, I don't want to castigate Doug for the sins of the family around him, but usually apples do not fall far from the tree. So let's just keep a watch on that situation and see what happens. But for now, his daughter is going to continue her little Instagram rants, and no one's going to be able to stop her. So let's keep an eye on that. Might turn into something interesting. And finally, rounding out our headlines, Going over to Hong Kong, which is currently a territory of China. Not sure if that's going to stay the same, but China's not going to let it go. The Chinese national government is busy ripping down the monuments to Tiananmen Square. You probably remember Tiananmen Square if you're old enough, and if not, you might not. See, the Tiananmen Square massacre took place in 1989, and in it, basically, there were some students protesting that they wanted better rights, easier income, stuff like that. The stuff students protest about everywhere in any city worldwide. And they're always going to. But the government there decided to call in the army. And they decided to kill a lot of the students. Tanks were in there. If you look it up, you'll probably find some clips on YouTube. But remember what I said in the beginning about the Chinese public relations and what they're trying to do to make themselves seem squeaky clean? They're trying to erase Tiananmen Square from the memory of the public consciousness. I dated a Chinese girl not so long ago, before I met my significant other. And she said, oh, the government said it was one general that went rogue, and he's the one that called in the tanks. So the government has already got this PR campaign going in their local area, when we know the Chinese government doesn't work that way. You might be a general, but if you call in the tanks and your higher-ups don't agree with it, you're going up with the firing squad. The general was not in the right to do what he did in any way, shape, or form. Don't get me wrong. It was entirely unforgivable. But the buck didn't stop with him. No matter how high up he is, the president, the prime minister, all sorts of officials in government would have been able to stop him with just a phone call. This forgotten tragedy is becoming more and more remote by the day. And if they're tearing down monuments to it, they want you to forget. Because China wants to present itself as the happy, friendly place where the workers are not locked into slave conditions and forced to work multiple hours a day, 12, 14 hours without a break, not allowed to go home, and just horrible conditions for the most part. And that's a tragic thing. But we can never forget the past, because the second we do, well, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. Let's turn to sports. A lot of teams played. Some teams won, some teams lost, a couple tied. There were some highlights, there were some lowlights, and that's pretty much all anybody cares about sports. We have an opinion piece from Ambarish Chandra, Globe and Mail. And he puts forward his opinion, are travel bans discriminatory? I read his article. He raised some really, really good points. And I have to agree with him. Travel bans are discriminatory. And right now, they are mostly around Africa, which are some of the poorest nations in the world. And also, let's be honest, majority black. But with his implication of discrimination, I have to slightly veer away from what he's saying. Now, again, I am freely admitting, the current round of travel legislations is based around Africa. But that's where the Omicron variant popped up. That's where it was first discovered. And we have to revert back to the things that we know, because they're seeing this Omicron variant. They don't know anything about it. They can't muster an adequate defense. So, the only thing left to do is to revert back to the 1930s, put up barriers and say, hey, you can't come in here because you might be sick. Considering everything between Africa and here would go by airline, unfortunately, it doesn't work. We have a couple citizens from Nigeria who managed to make it through, and there's already 4 cases of the Omicron variant. So are travel restrictions effective? Here's why I absolutely agree with him. I don't think they are. Because by the time you detect a virus and you find out what it is, the travel has already happened. Now, the risks that you get are, let's call them pandemic refugees. We already have economic refugees who are trying to move from one place to another. And now we have pandemic-related refugees who are trying to get out of a bad area. And it's really hard to find fault with them for that. I mean, if I'm somewhere and I've just survived all these lockdowns and there's a new variant, I'm going to be scared too. So it's really hard for me to fault the travel restrictions. However, I'm forced to wonder, we sent the Canadian field hockey team to South Africa, the country. And they're there right now and they can't get home. Because supposedly the airlines will not fly over and there's no connecting places. Now, Canada has this thing called a military and an air force with some significant lifting power. Not only Hercules, but C-130s and all sorts of passenger planes. Because, generals need to get about too. So why is it we are not capable of negotiating with, say, the Azores? We're going to tell them, okay, our planes are going to land, we want you to refuel them, and then get them going, and have paramedics ready to isolate people if necessary. There's no reason we couldn't get our people out of there, because we've done it before. In Syria, in Haiti, when there were problems down there, this is all stuff we have done before. So why can't we do it now all of a sudden? And I mean, these are athletes. These are the fittest of the fit, the healthiest of the healthy. And we've seen the NFL and the NBA and all those places do a pretty good job at containing outbreaks of COVID. So let's bring them back, isolate them for a couple of weeks, and then let them go about their daily lives. So I'm going to agree with Ambarish Chandra, mostly. The border restrictions are, in fact, discriminatory. Naturally, they're discriminatory. I mean, if I close off my backyard to my next door neighbor, that's a form of discrimination, but it's based on the fact it's my property. And not that I can do with it what I want, but at the same token, you do have property rights. And travel bans, yes, they do slightly infringe on personal rights, but at the same token, it's not in a racist sense. We're not coming down on you because you are a Nigerian. We're coming down on you because there is another threat that people are concerned about. So let's avoid the rhetoric and start concentrating on how effective, realistically, these travel bans are. Because while we have people stranded overseas, whether it be a field hockey team or whether it simply be a businessman that got on the wrong plane at the wrong time, or worse yet, somebody that got redirected from somewhere else, we have an obligation. We have the right to protect our citizens. And if we have to close the border, then we will. But, like I said, let's find out how effective it is, because while we had closed borders, we still had a pretty significant infective rate of Delta. Let's hope the same doesn't happen with Omicron. But anyways, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please hit like and subscribe, and we hope you all have a fantastic day.